Good morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher, and today I wanted to talk about combat. I especially wanted to talk about how we can make combats feel faster and better as GMs, as opposed to making them feel like long, boring slog fests. Now, the reason for why I'm making this video is because I ran a combat for my core group on Saturday that I walked away from not being super thrilled with it. I felt like that combat really stretched out. I felt like I was trying to do too much. I felt like there were too many enemies, and ultimately I felt like it sort of bogged down the encounter and made it kind of boring. I also didn't really like that some of the enemies were a little bit, I would say, mismatched in terms of power. I probably could have balanced it better. Long story short, I think that there are some techniques that I was reminded of running that combat. I haven't felt like I've run a combat that got clunky in a long time. So this was sort of a refresher to me about the main ingredients of what makes a combat move quickly and feel good. So today I want to talk about basically the three ingredients for good combats, but also I want to give you one takeaway sort of idea that is a little bit new that I think I'm going to do more thinking about moving forward to try to avoid this problem in the future. If you have ever felt like your combats were a little bit boring, a little bit bogged down, just didn't feel super exciting, then this video is exactly what you are looking for. And like I said, I'm going to give you kind of the three basic tips, and then we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into that fourth tip, which is going to be kind of my new revelation on the topic. So let's dive into pointer number one. Whenever you are running a combat, you want to make sure that players are getting more time, more gameplay time as a net total than non-player characters. And this includes enemies. Now, at this particular combat, there were a bunch of NPCs, friendly NPCs. There were quite a few enemy combatants. And so I did a bit of a test where I gave NPC characters to player characters and was basically like, here, command them during the combat. I feel like this was actually pretty cool. It would have been way more of a slog if I wouldn't have done that. It was fun to relegate movement and actions of friendly NPCs to the players as opposed to running them myself. This allowed me to focus just on running the enemies and on one NPC who the players basically said, GM, it would be weird if you didn't run this NPC. So you run her, we're going to run the others. And this was fine with me. With that being said, I still feel like, as a general rule, I put too many enemies into the fight. And here's why. At the end of the battle, it still felt a lot like my time spent taking enemy turns and then the players' turns spent taking their turns collectively were about even. Maybe it actually took a little bit longer for them to take their turns than it took me to run enemy combat turns, but it was still too close. And this led me to believe that either number one, I should have really simplified combat for the enemies, or number two, I should have ran fewer enemies and maybe boosted their stats more. I realize that you can get really out-action economied by the players if they have a bunch of NPCs and there's a bunch of them, there's only one or two bad guys. But I would rather have that problem than run into a slogfest problem where I'm rolling a bunch of dice, doing a bunch of things, and basically then you have players just kind of sitting around waiting for your turn to be done. I feel like it's just inviting boredom. So that's sort of one general pointer that I was reminded of during this combat. I felt like I could have put fewer enemy units in and that would have been better. Point number two is inject some role play into combat to make it feel more epic. Do a little more role playing, put a little more pizzazz into it rather than just be like, okay, roll for hit. Okay, roll for damage. Okay, now it's your turn, right? Do a little more role play. Like the blade hits the enemy. He growls. You are not going to win this fight. Just like a little bit more role play. Put a little bit more. Now, here's the problem that I run into. I always give this tip, and I think it's a good tip. However, referring back to the first tip, I feel like the problem I ran into on my core group session on Saturday was that, once again, there were kind of so many enemies that they didn't really get the spotlight they deserved. Yes, friendlies did some role playing, but I didn't really role play enemy combatants very much during combat. But even more so than that, I didn't end up role-playing any friendly NPC interactions, which I kind of think should have been done. There should have been a bit more drama injected into it. And the reason why this didn't happen was because players were controlling the NPCs, which was actually better because that gave the players more stuff to do. They could take more actions, they could affect greater change in the battle. With that being said, this did take away from the role play element. And so next time going into it, I'm just not going to run such a wide scale combat. If there are a bunch of NPCs, I think it's still fun to let players control them, and I'm kind of dabbling with that. I used to think that was a bit of a taboo tactic because I kind of thought that breaks immersion, because they wouldn't normally get to control NPCs. They would just give them orders and then I would act them out, which usually I agree with. But seeing as how this was a larger combat, I was more worried about the problem of players not getting as much time while I was rolling all these dice for these NPCs. So I would rather risk that immersion problem and let players do more cool stuff. So, that was like the trade-off I made. But I feel like putting myself in that position, looking back on it, was probably not the best position to put myself in to begin with. And I do want to double down on role play the next time I run a combat, because role play in combat is really important. I feel like if we do not do some role playing during combat, then we may as well just be relegating it to a minis combat game, which sometimes is not all that bad. I just feel like we can really lend to the emotional connection of combat by doing a little more role play during the combat. And so that's something that I kind of feel like I missed out on. That's a point I usually give in my combat videos, and I feel like it's a really good pointer, and I just feel like I fell a bit short of it on Saturday. And so next combat I have coming up, I'm going to really kind of reinvest myself into that. Be like, okay, I want to remember that I'm going to want to do some role play, so let's limit the number of units. Let's not have such a big like multi-unit combat. Let's simplify the combat so that we can focus a little bit more on the role play during combat. Now, real quick before we jump into point number 3, I just want to ask you, do you ever struggle with coming up with random plot arcs on the fly? Do you struggle with players making decisions and then thinking to yourself, man, I don't know where to go with this? I'm a little creatively blocked right now. Well, I have a free ebook that's called The GM Philosopher's Ultimate Plot Randomizer, and it is designed to help GMs solve this exact problem. It has 4 D100 tables that let you random roll plot hooks on the fly. There's a hook table, there is a complication table, there is a climax table, and then of course a wild and wacky table to throw in unique plot elements that your players will never see coming. If you tend to find that your players often go off the rails and do things you never expected, and you want to come up with awesome plot hooks on the fly, this will let you random roll it 4 quick rolls of your percentiles, and boom, you will have a plot arc that you can run with, and you can create basically, limitless plot hooks for days with these 4 100 tables. I give this away for free. Link is in the description. If you sign up for my email list, you'll receive an email within the first few seconds. It'll come pretty much right away, and it'll have the download link to this ebook in it as a free gift to you for joining my email list. On that email list, I send out tips, pointers. Sometimes I send out homebrew stat blocks, all kinds of cool stuff to help you level up your game master craft in any way. Boom. If you would like to download that, click on that link in the description, join my email list, and you will get that link, and then you will be equipped to create those plot hooks for days, no matter what your players decide to do. All right, with that being said, let's dive into point number 3. Now, point number 3 here is actually a little bit of an embarrassing one for me, because I did something on Saturday that I have not done in a long time. And I'm going to tell you what happened and why it happened. And this is basically going to be my third point. My third point is understand exactly what your creatures or monsters can do, especially if you're running them from the monster manual. So I was running some demons from the 5th edition monster manual, and there were quite a few different ones. And I did do a review of the different demons and kind of what they did and what their abilities were, but I did not look as closely as I should have. And I hate to say it, but when I was running those demons during combat, I overused some of their abilities, made them basically way more deadly, way more dangerous, way more powerful than they should have been. Now, my players caught on to this and right away kind of recognized that one of the demons was doing something that seemed really crazy. And they kind of said, whoa, what is he like a special demon, or is he like, regular demon? Because I don't think that he would normally get to do that. And so we consulted the rules, and it was quite indeed the case that because I had not fully understood the abilities of the demon going in, I sort of glanced over them and thought I did. I assumed that I knew when I kind of glossed over them what was going on, but I did not. And there were a couple demons that I misused their abilities. And so this was a feel bad moment for me as a GM. And I'm sure it was a feel bad moment for the players, because what ended up happening was a couple of the players got pretty clobbered by abilities that were bigger than they should have been. And this this didn't have like a massive effect on the game. It didn't result in any players like going down or dying like when they shouldn't have, but it did result in, I feel like, players feeling a bit like, whoa, this wasn't really fair, which was actually valid. And so what I did was I kind of said, oh, wow, you guys are right. I was actually running that wrong. Let's cancel that ability that demon was just about to do. Let's call his turn over. Now that I know, we will go closer to rules as written for these demon abilities. And that really resolved it, and the combat moved on. But this just goes to show that even if you're very experienced and you think you know what's going on, you might misread an ability, you might misread a rule. This happens all the time, and you shouldn't feel super bad about this. But you do want to do your homework before the session. Really actually make sure you do the homework and actually read through the abilities and the rules that you plan on using, just so that you get clear on them. And once again, this helps to make combat faster, because if you don't have to stop and like look up rules, or you don't have to stop and like second guess yourself or anything like that, it does help combat to go faster. And then you can get those enemy turns done quicker, and you can get back to the players taking their turns, which is really the meat and potatoes of the combat. Like, that's what the players are looking forward to. So boom, that's tip number 3, is just understand the monsters you're running and make sure that you're clear on what they're doing with those stat blocks. This will feel way better for everybody. Now, I have one more tip. I want to dive deep and talk about something I don't usually talk about when it comes to combat, something I was reminded of in this session I ran on Saturday that I want to improve on and get better at moving forward. But before we dive into that, I just want to share a new project with you that I've created. This is an ebook called The Ultimate Adventure Generator, a massive collection of 163 random roll tables to assist you in generating amazing TTRPG fantasy adventures. Now listen, I've been creating books for my audience for quite a while now, and I've realized a couple of things. Number one, creating ebooks that are not printer friendly just doesn't make sense. So this is completely printer friendly. Secondly, this is massive. 300, let me just show you something real quick. 310 total pages, totaling up 163 different random roll tables, governing basically every aspect of adventure creation. We have chapter 1. I'm just going to go through the chapters super quick. Selecting the adventure theme, defining the main quest or objective, choosing the setting or location, identify the main antagonist, determine key NPCs, generate obstacles and challenges, add complications or plot twists, and the list just goes on and on. And each of these chapters has massive tables in it. Like, for example, in chapter 1, we've got chapter 1, selecting the adventure theme. It goes right into random. So we have a D10 table for genre, a D12 table for primary theme, a D12 table for setting environment. We go all the way through this down to this plug and play adventure theme ideas D20 table, 20 literally plug and play adventure themes that you can grab and run with just whenever you are ready, whenever you need it. We also have in chapter 2 here, a lot of these have plug and play D100 tables. For example, in chapter 2, which is define the main quest or objective, we have tables for helping you to determine the main quest, all kinds of tables, all the way down to this plug and play quest lines D100 table, literally 100 plug and play quest lines that you can take and run with. And that's just the beginning. That's just in the first 2 chapters. This is my newest, most up-to-date ebook creation. I love it. I think it's the best thing I've ever created, and it's got so much stuff in it, and it's all printer friendly. And hey, listen, if you purchase this today, link is down in the description. You can grab this for just $5.99. I'm selling this for $5.99 because of a few different reasons. Number one, it's a print-friendly book. You can buy it print it out, use what you need. You'll always have it. Number two, I know that times are getting kind of hard out there. I know that it's getting expensive to dump $25, $30, $40 on a book. My print books that I've made, which I love and they're fancy and everything, but they run a little expensive, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, depending on what edition you're getting. I realize that this is a lot for people to pay. I realize that people are busy working, they're busy paying their bills. It is hard to dump that much money into books for TTRPGs. So this book, priced at $5.99, I feel like is super affordable. Anyone could grab it and pick it up. And since it's an ebook, it makes it easy and it's print friendly. So if you want to print out the whole thing, it'll be even cheaper than buying a print book. So boom. And then finally, I am trying to find a great way to support my channel monetarily. Creating these videos does cost money. It costs time, costs energy. And so this is also a way that you can give back to my channel if you feel so inclined. If you enjoy my content and you would like to support me, then you can grab this book and boom, if you do that, consider me supported and I will be so massively appreciative and grateful to you. Thank you so much for your support. So link is down in the description. You can grab the Ultimate Adventure Generator today for just $5.99, and that price may not last forever. I wanted to launch it at a really affordable price, so grab it while it is available at that price. Boom. With that being said, let's dive into the final tip, the deeper tip, the one that I really want to talk about in this video that I think maybe will have the most significance on this topic of keeping combat fun and fast and keeping it from turning into a slog fest. Now, in combat, there are a few different, let's say, modes that we can, engage in. And sandbox versus story driven, I think kind of fits in here. Or should I say player driven versus GM driven? Now, I don't usually make this mistake, but I believe that on Saturday I did make this mistake of running the game, running the combat in a more GM driven manner than a player driven manner. I think that what happened was my energy toward the combat was the enemies are doing these things. Let's see what the players do. And I know that that doesn't maybe sound like a big difference, but the enemies can still do that while you as a GM maintain a more sandboxy, a more player-driven focus. And here is really where the crux comes down to. I will admit, I got so caught up in session prep. I got so caught up in these monsters I was running. I got so caught up in like the details of why the characters were there and kind of the story that went along with it. I got so caught up in so many different aspects of preparing for that combat because I really wanted to make it like an epic, like it was kind of a session arc close combat. It was basically wrapping up the session or this adventure arc the players had been on, that I made the mistake of focusing too much on those things. I focused too much on the monsters. I focused too much on my plans for the monsters for the combat. I focused too much on the fact that this was a plot arc and that we were bringing it to a close. And I didn't just let the players lead the way in my thought process. If I would have thought to myself, okay, this is just how they're set up. Let's see what the players do. And then just rolled with that and then just slowed down a little bit and took a little bit more time. Like I said before, if I took a little bit more time and read those monster abilities during session prep a little bit better, I had the time to do it. I just overlooked some of them because I thought I knew them. And this is a rookie mistake. You know what they say? Assume makes an ass out of you and me. And I assumed I knew what these creatures did without fully reading the abilities. So next time I have a combat like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a minute before the combat starts. After my session prep, before combat starts, I'm going to think to myself, player driven. This is the story of this player and this player and this player, or rather the characters they are playing, but it's their story to drive. I'm just filling in the pixels around them. I'm going to, slow it down, take a step back. When it's time to move a monster, I'm going to make sure I understand their abilities. They're going to do their thing. Boom, done with maybe a little bit of role play. They talk a little smack. Now we're back to players. Okay, what do you guys want to do? Put the focus on that. My mental focus needs to be on that. What I'm trying to say is we need to keep combat player focused. Let players do most of the heavy lifting. Let players make most of the decision making. And then the monsters are going to do what they're going to do for sure. But if our energy as GMs is behind these monsters, instead of being behind, let's observe the story being told by the players and what will enhance that story. What is the natural recourse of that story? When we shift our energy more toward players and being player driven, that's going to make combats feel so much better. And that is probably the deeper underlying mistake I felt like I made on Saturday that made that combat feel kind of bad for me. It made it feel like I didn't do a great job running it. With that being said, we all make mistakes. Just because I've been GMing for 20 plus years does not mean I don't make mistakes. Literally every single session, I realize that there are 2, 3, 4 things I did that I kind of regret that I want to learn from and do better next time. And that's just how it goes. And that's how your experience as a GM is probably going to be too. And you know what they say? The only bad GM is the GM who thinks they have it all figured out and that there's nothing left to learn. So do not stress over it. If you've run some clunky combats, take these tips and deploy them, but more than anything, experiment and see what works really well. And then you're going to walk away from every combat better equipped to run the next one. And boom, that's how it's going to be. So, hey, that's all I have to say on this one. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. Roll some D100s for me at your next session, and I will see you awesome people on the next one.